Good morning, everyone. My name is Sofia. I'm the marketing manager of SGO. I'm going to be brief. I just wanted to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can use the dialog box on your right. And I'll leave you now with Peter Ames, who is our education and training mentor, and he'll run the webinar for us.
Hello, everybody. Welcome along. Thank you for joining us today. The plan is that this is the first of what we hope will be a long series of Mamba training webinars. We're planning on running one a month, and each month we'll cover a different topic. We'll look at tips and tricks inside Mamba, cover different areas of training, so that you can get a better understanding of what the product is. And obviously a big part of it will be introducing new features and new releases as we get them out to you. So, being the first one and having just released our new MambaFX version 2.0, we thought we would start off the webinars and use this session to introduce you to some of the new features. So, let's get straight into it. So, there are a few major new features in Mamba 2.0. We've released 2.0 to tie in with the imminent Mistika version 8.0 release, and a lot of the technology that we're bringing into Mamba is technology that has been developed in parallel both for Mamba and for Mistika. So there's some great new features. A lot of what we're putting into this release, some of you will have already seen maybe during demos at NAB of Mistika, and in fact a number of these features are coming into Mamba before we've even got them into Mistika. So kind of exciting to get them out and get people's hands on the technology. So in terms of major new operational features, there's one of the big ones is the inclusion of a few new tools to interact with EXR footage and to make use of the multiple layers or additional channels of metadata that you can render into EXR footage from software like Maya, 3D Studio Max, Blender, or other animation and 3D CGI software. And then also we've introduced the shape tracker, our shape tracker into Mamba, which is fairly exciting and speeds up a lot of the standard day-to-day mundane tasks of working in this kind of software. So it's fantastic technology, incredibly fast, and we're really happy that we can get it out to more people. So rather than talking about it, let's just get straight into a demo. I am here on Windows. We're running Windows 8.1, and I will open up Mamba. And here we are inside the Mamba interface. So we will get started by having a look at the new Layer Root tool. As I talked about, the Layer Root tool is designed to allow you to interact with the multiple channels of an EXR file and to access and extract the various bits of metadata and the various additional channels that can be incorporated into EXR footage. This sample file that I've put onto the node tree is a single frame of EXR. And as you can see in my viewer, it looks completely black. And this is a typical or relatively common scenario for EXRs. Certain software doesn't necessarily export an EXR with RGB channels, with your main viewing channels flagged correctly or flagged in a way that every bit of software understands. And this is one example. If I add to my EXR file a layer root, and we can see that down on the right of our screen is our new layer root tool. If I add, if I add the layer root node and double click it, in the bottom on the left we can see the toolset for the layer root node. For those of you who are familiar with the channels node in Mistika or in Mamba, it's very similar. It allows you to access the different channels within source media and then combine them or manipulate them in various ways. The first option that we have at the top here, our layer set, allows us to view all the different layers or all the different media channels that are inserted into that EXR. And then I can choose within that layer set which channel I want to visualize and pass out of the node. So in this case, if I choose my my top layer, the all combined layer, I can see the RGB of the image as it was intended to be seen. Obviously, this is what you'd expect to see as soon as you loaded the EXR up, but as I discussed, certain animation software won't necessarily flag the EXR channels in a way that's instantly understandable by every bit of software. As an example, this is a file, this particular EXR file, I tried opening up in various applications and all of them just showed a black image. So, using the new layer root tool, you're able to access all of that. If we cycle through, though, we can see all of the channels that are available to us. For instance, we can look at just the floor of the original render, or we can look at the floor without the shadows, just the diffusion layer on the floor. We can visualize and extract from that EXR each of the individual elements or each of the individual objects that were rendered into it, the three shapes in this instance. Or we can have a look, for instance, at just the lighting effect. So if I click on the layer set and choose my last option, I can look at just the specular highlights and extract just the specular highlights that were rendered into that original scene. So, largely a utility function, but the new layer root tool allows a lot of flexibility when it comes to playing with EXR footage. And it allows you to extract all of that additional metadata and utilize all of that additional metadata that was rendered in. So I will delete those and we'll move on and have a look instead at the spatial isolation toolset. Again, many of you will have seen some of these tools either demoed in Mistika or may have been playing around with some of them if you've got early access to some of the early builds of Mistika 8.2. But here we have the finished toolset available in Mamba 2.0. This clip here is a 3D scene of some rhinos, and this was animated in Blender, and I believe there are a total of 128 rhinos in the scene. You've probably seen me use and discuss this footage before, but I really like it for this particular tool. I'm going to quickly comp that together with a standard background, so I will grab our comp 3D node and then wire up my rhinos as my second input to comp those together. Maybe at the same time I will add a framing node in between my background and my comp, and then I can quickly adjust the positioning and the scale to align that a little better. So there we are. I will move those off to the side and we'll concentrate just on the EXR for now. If I double click on the EXR, then I'm going to visualize just that layer, just the output of that node, or in this case just the raw media in my record monitor or in my viewer. If I look at just the alpha channel, we see that that file has a standard alpha channel available as well, which is what's being used in the composite. But we have the ability to access a lot more information and a lot more detail inside this EXR file. This particular file was rendered out with additional layers, which we can have a look at by adding a layer root effect. And I will swap over and have a look here for now. And if we look inside our layer sets, we can see that not only do we have the RGB and alpha, but we also have depth layers, we have material ID layers, object ID layers, and also at the bottom a surface normals layer, which again we can visualize using the layer root tool. So this is a visualization of the surface normals layer inside an EXR. I'm just going to delete that and rewire my comp. And instead I'm going to lay this up with a spatial isolation tool. And again, we can find the spatial isolation tool inside our keying tools down here at the bottom of the list. There we go. So I select my footage and add that in. If I double click on the spatial isolation tool, you can see our new toolset available. On On the left are various elements for interacting, or the numeric parameters for interacting with the effect, or on the right we have selection buttons, which we can have a look at in more detail. Again, we can look at this raw alpha channel, and I can start to use that as the basis for showing you how this spatial keyer works. I'm going to start by using the top spatial keyer tool, Pick Object ID. And Pick Object ID allows us to use the Object ID layer of the EXR to generate mats or alphas that are very specifically, what's the word I'm looking for? Very specifically shaped. They're very specific to each individual object in the scene. Excuse me, it's very early for me. This afternoon I'm going to be a lot better, I'm sure. But what I can do by selecting Pick Object ID, I can then point and click anywhere within the scene and limit my alpha channel, the alpha channel that's being exported from this node, to just the element that I'm clicking on. So by pointing and clicking around the scene, I can select each individual object from the original 3D space. So if I go back and pick just the center rhino, and again have a look at my RGB layers, if I return to look at my comp, I'm now comping on just that one object. I've limited my alpha channel to only that one object within the original scene, and I'm limiting the comp to just that one object as well. As well as using Object ID, the Pick Object tool can also be used to pick Material ID. Inside my Object ID numeric parameters on the left, you can see that the layer set I'm using to target my selection is this layer here, the index OB, or Object ID. Instead, I'm going to select my index MA, or Material ID, and now if I reset here, I can click and drag these numeric parameters to cycle through 6 different selections. And these 6 different selections match up with the 6 different surface textures that the rhinos were originally rendered with. So I can select all of the elements or all of the objects that match a very specific surface texture. Maybe I need to relight just certain elements or recolor just one texture within my final scene. Moving on, we also have options for pick position. So if I pick position and have a look at the numeric parameters here, I'm going to say that I want to use the, where do I want it? The composite layer, I believe. I might have this wrong. It did take me 2 minutes to figure out yesterday. There we go. And I can point and click within the scene, and I'm creating a localized selection that is based on the numeric parameters on my left. So I am creating a selection shape, a 3D sphere in this instance, or I can also create a 3D box selection. But if I create a 3D sphere, I can then adjust the size of that localized sphere and also the softness of the sphere, and I can create alpha channels, mats, or selections that are limited to the very specific parameters that I'm inputting. With pick depth, we have the ability to select a localized plane within 3D space. So here, as I point and click through the scene, you can see that I'm selecting a plane within the original 3D space that I can then also give size, and I can give softness to that selection as well. I can then click and drag also within my depth Z parameter to drag that selection forward and back within 3D space. And this becomes very useful either for recoloring scenes and recoloring or color grading foreground, midground, and background individually, or for really passing through to any effects node in Mamba that understands an alpha channel and will work within an alpha channel. So in this instance, I'm going to change my shape to be the inverse selection, and I'm then going to place a new effect, a blur effect, within my scene, and I'll rewire, and we'll have a look at if we look back at now RGB, here I am in my Gaussian blur node, and I can blur the scene, and then tell the blur node to only blur inside the alpha, and I'll try zooming in on here. It's a good chance to show you our new interface as well. if I can click this correctly. No. It doesn't want to drag for me. There we go. As you can see in my viewer, I can actually use the spatial isolation tool to rack focus forward and back within 3D space. So I can actually effectively create depth of field effects using these new keying tools. There we go. The last tool I'll show you within the spatial keyer is our pick direction tool. And this is utilizing the surface normals layer within the EXR to create effectively directional relighting effects. We're generating alpha channels or keys that simulate that are simulated based on the surface normals layer of the EXR and create a selection perpendicular to any surface within the 3D model, the original model. So if I click pick direction and then click on the side of the a model within the scene, or click and drag, you can see I'm generating keys that simulate or are simulated based on the direction of the surface I'm clicking on within the 3D space. And this is particularly useful within color grading. I'm going to actually take that cue then and delete my spatial keyer, and instead I'm going to wire the original source footage up to a color grade node. Within this color grade node, I will flip back to look at our RGB, and you can see if within the color grade node I click on highlight to look at the current selection, we're selecting the entire scene. However, if I come into the new multi-layer tab within color grade, I can click any of these selection tools and I can generate selections that inside color grade are the same as the selections we'd make inside the spatial isolation keyer, but instead of being passed out of the node as an alpha channel, they are being passed into the current grading vector as a selection or key. So if I click Object ID, for instance, I can create keys that inside my color grade allow my grade to be applied just to one part of the scene. If I clear that work, and instead of picking Object ID, I pick direction, I'll go back and look at our highlight first, and pick direction, I can now create directional lighting by making a selection, coming back into color grade, and then grading the scene within that selection. And if we zoom in and go back to our multi-layer tab, within pick direction, you can see that I'm creating directional relighting of the 3D space, of the original 3D scene, but within the context of a 2D rendered element that we're going to comp. Of course, I can also do that and view that in the context of my final comp. So in this instance, I can single click on my color grade and then be adjusting my lighting direction to fit in with the final comp scene. There's also nothing stopping you from combining multiple selections. So if we come back to color grade and click on the multi-layer tab, I'll turn on my highlight first, click on the multi-layer tab, I've made a pick direction selection. I can now pick Object ID as well, for instance, and limit the selection to not only a lighting direction, but to a specific object within the scene. There we go. That is the spatial isolation toolset, and hopefully that's interesting. I know it's getting a lot of good feedback, so hopefully you find it useful. We'll move on and have a look at the shape tracker. We've probably got another 5 to 10 minutes, so let's have a quick look at this. For those of you familiar with Mistika, the new shape tracker will be very familiar. I am going to bring up, it's my favorite shot to demo with the shape tracker, so if any of you have ever had me demo the shape tracker in Mistika, then this is going to be a little boring, and I apologize in advance. Here we have a scene with, it's a panning shot that pans across 3 faces before settling on the last guy's t-shirt. And this is a tricky shot. It's not only do we have faces that are tracking off screen, but we also have faces that are, or the tracking is made more difficult by the fact that this is a very unstable handheld shot as well. So we're going to start by tracking the first character's face. And I'm going to come into, I'm going to double click on the clip, and then inside our Shapes tab, I'll create a shape and draw the shape, a very rough shape, around his face. I'm going to select all the points, and with the set point mode, I'm going to change that to smooth points. And then I can very quickly and easily select the entire shape, and using my shape tracking tools on the right hand side, I can track that element through the scene. So first I'm going to track backwards, and then I'm going to track forwards. And you can see that very, very quickly we have a shape tracked across the face. For those of you who haven't seen this before, this is a point cloud tracker. So the way that Mistika is doing this, the way that we're working, is when we track the scene, when we track the shape, Mistika is automatically populating the shape with a series of points, tracking points, that it sees are good tracking points, high contrast tracking points that it's going to be able to manage through the scene. When we track that shape, the shape is automatically animated as well to not only match the movement of the shape, but also the rotation. And at the bottom right here, you can see that we have options for tracking and animating either size or size XY. So when we track the shape, we can either track overall, or we're able to animate the shape overall in terms of its size, or animate the X and Y dimensions individually. If we move on to the next character, this is a little harder. As we track through the scene, you can see that his face turns substantially, and we end up with him switching profile slightly between the beginning and end of his appearance on the shot. So I'm going to find a midpoint here and create a shape around his face. Maybe add 1 or 2 more points. And again, I will select those points. I will turn them into smooth points. And then I'm going to select those and track backwards. And then come back to that starting frame. And forwards. And we've tracked that shape. Now, as you can see, while the starting point of the shape is very good, and for a number of frames either side, we see a consistent and even track, you can see that as he turns his face, the shape is starting to go off to one side. So within the toolset, we can also key the shape. By clicking Auto Key at the bottom in the animation section of the Shapes tab, any movement we now make on the shape or any adjustment we now make will be keyframed. And this is one of the brilliant things about this tracker. Not only is it super fast on high-resolution content, and just so that you're aware, this is uncompressed HD, and I'm currently working off a laptop. Not only is it super fast, super efficient, but by tracking with an automated tracker like this, even if we're not hugging the edges of the shape perfectly, which is, let's face it, it's the holy grail of tracking for roto, and one day the industry will be there. We're getting there as quickly as we can. But not only do we track incredibly quickly, by automatically tracking using this point cloud technology, we're able to account for or integrate all the tiny little variations in X and Y movement that are introduced by the handheld camera. We can help counteract grain and the impact of grain or noise on the accuracy of the track by using an aggregating point cloud. And also, because all of that is already in place, as we start going through, we can, with usually just a couple of keyframes in a scene like this, a couple of movements, I can create a track that I am happy with. There's another, and as I move off to the side a bit, I might move that. And then right at the end, I'm just going to drop it down slightly. And there we go. So we have a nicely tracked shape. Reasonably. Maybe just at the end here I want to tidy up one or two small points. I hope that's interesting, and I'm hoping it's all very useful for you. I did have one other example of the tracking, and this is a very quick shot, but just where I find this tracker to be incredibly useful. Here is an example. It's one I created earlier because I didn't want you all to be sitting and waiting while I drew a complex shape around this leaf here. But here you can see I've created a shape around a leaf. Currently there is no track on that at all, but there is a decent amount of movement to the leaf, and that track is going to be interfered with by the fact that we've got water droplets falling down the leaf as well. However, using the point cloud tracker, I'm able to come into my shape, and with the selections pre-made, I'm going to track forward and very quickly and seamlessly get a very accurate track on that shape. That again might need a tiny bit of cleanup, and the auto keying tools allow you to use the shape tracker to get a really accurate or very reasonable first track that only needs a small amount of work to clean up and tidy up. So hopefully that's interesting. That was the last thing I had to show you today. I hope it's all tools that will be useful in the future. So if I quickly switch back to a little presentation. A few other things to talk about with MumbaFX 2.0. There is a new ACES color conversion node that we're introducing. This might be very useful for some of you who are integrating the shots you work on into larger ACES-based workflows. Or if you're working on material that's been provided in an ACES space that you need to visualize or preview, obviously in a manner where you can actually see what you're working on. So the ACES node is a color conversion tool for not only converting material from ACES into a variety of display spaces, and it's the display spaces that are published by the Academy that are supported within Mumba and Mistika, but it also allows you to cross-convert between ACES spaces, between ACES-defined display spaces. So converting between, for instance, a P3 space and a Rec 709 space, but using the ACES math and the published ODT from the Academy to achieve that, all very quickly and simply. We also have a new adaptive interface which will be very welcome for a lot of you, and there's a couple of things here. One of the most interesting is that you can now work with multiple monitors. If you use Mumba in a multi-monitor setup with 2 GUI monitors, those 2 GUI monitors can now be set up with different resolutions. Previously in Mumba 1.0, the 2 monitors had to be the same resolution, and now you can vary to your heart's content. We also have support built in for the new Dolby EDR monitor technology, and also support for Mac OS as well. So we're very excited to be releasing our first version of Mumba for Mac OS. We've had a question with regards to Mac support and the GPUs that are utilized in the new Mac Pro. Apple are fond of their AMD GPUs, and so full assurance from me that, well, I have been assured that you will have no worries with AMD. NVIDIA are a preferred partner of SGO, and most of our development and testing is against the NVIDIA chipsets, but the technology, especially in Mumba, the technology is designed to be agnostic and fully supports the AMD chipsets. So if you have a Mac Pro with AMD GPUs, congratulations, I am jealous and I want one. If you don't want it, feel free to send it to me. But we we fully support them. I guess that's it. So we will take our next step. I'm going to say thank you very much for coming along. I'm hoping to run these once a month, as I say, as we move forward. Our next session is tentatively scheduled for the 12th of August. And the plan is to run that session as a general interview, a general introduction to Mamba as a whole. So starting from scratch, an introduction to the interface, importing media, and how you manipulate media, add effects, and work within the environment. If you do have any ideas for topics that you'd like to see us cover in one of these webinars, if there's a specific feature that you'd like us to go over in detail, or an interesting compositing topic that you think we could do a session on, please let us know. So keep an eye on Facebook and Twitter, and also if you are not subscribed to the SGO newsletter, then please do so, and you'll be updated on when we're going to run these webinars. If you've got ideas, drop us a line, and ideas for session topics, drop us a line on Facebook or Twitter, or use the hashtag AskMambaFX, and that will get through to Sophia, and we'll compile all the ideas and come up with hopefully some cool sessions, some interesting sessions. And there we go. I will pass on to Sophia to say thank you, and thank you all for coming along from me.
Thank you again for joining us. Well, Peter just basically said what I was going to say. It's like, if you want to know more about our releases and everything, just subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And just thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.